Hello, welcome to Kellogg Public Library's virtual story time. My name is Sherry. The story I'm going to share with you today is The Scariest Monster in the Whole Wide World by Pamela Mayer, illustrated by Lydia Monks. Last Halloween, Thea Doohickey won second prize at the costume parade. Her mother and father were so proud. This Halloween, they wanted her to come in first. Mrs. Doohickey placed the photograph of Thea in her prize-winning fairy princess costume on the kitchen table. "Look at her little feet in the silver slippers," she said, "and her ringlets under her golden crown." "Ah, me," Mr. Doohickey sighed. "What do you want to be this year, precious?" they asked. "I want to be a butterfly," Mrs. Doohickey interrupted. "Pale blue leotard, filmy chiffon wings. No, Thea should be a Spanish dancer, all red and black ruffles. That will really wow the judges," Mr. Doohickey said. "Which do you prefer, darling?" they asked. "I want to be the scariest monster in the whole wide world," Thea said. Mr. and Mrs. Doohickey were too surprised to speak. "I want claws and fangs and green scales and blood dripping off the corners of my mouth and maybe even an axe coming out of my head. Can I, Mommy and Daddy? Please, may I?" Just then, the oven timer went off. Mrs. Doohickey jumped from her chair with a cry of "Eek!" "Oh boy, pumpkin pie," Thea said. Mr. Doohickey took the pie from the oven, but Thea was the only one who felt like eating. The next afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Doohickey took Thea downtown to the Halloween Superstore. They hurried toward the racks of beautiful costumes, but Thea tugged on their hands. "What I like is over here," she said. "How do I look?" she asked. "Ah!" Mrs. Doohickey screamed. A salesman came over. Would you like to see some great accessories to go with that mask?" he asked. "Not today," Mr. Doohickey said, and he led them out of the store. On the way home, Mrs. Doohickey wiped a tear from her eye. "Mary Lou Von Helper is going as Bo Peep. Her mother has been working on that costume for 6 months. Now, Mr. Doohickey said. "The scariest monster in the whole wide world could never win first prize at the costume parade," Mrs. Doohickey said sadly. "What are we going to do?" For the next several days, Mr. and Mrs. Doohickey visited costume shops, brought home sewing patterns, and leafed through mail-order catalogs, but whenever they showed Thea a costume, all she said was, "I want to be the scariest monster in the whole wide world. Can we get my costume tomorrow, please?" It was time to call for expert advice. Grandma arrived the next morning. "Boo!" she said. "Grandma! Sugar plum!" Grandma and Thea hugged. "Now you'll help us take care of Thea's costume," Mr. Doohickey said. "Don't worry," Grandma said. "Look, it's been ages since I've spent a day alone with Thea. Why don't you two go out?" Thea and Grandma spent all morning getting ready for Halloween. They decorated the house and were just dipping the last apple into caramel sauce when Grandma said, "Tell me about your Halloween costume." "I want to be the scariest monster in the whole wide world," Thea told Grandma about the claws and the fangs and the green scales and the axe. "Sounds good to me," said Grandma. "You know," Thea said, "sometimes I get the feeling Mommy and Daddy don't want me to be a scary monster at all." "I have an idea," Grandma said. "Are there any costume shops around here?" She and Thea raced downtown to the Halloween Superstore. They soon found everything they needed. Fortunately, Grandma was a whiz at sewing. She whipped up Thea's costume in no time and finished her other projects just as Mr. and Mrs. Doohickey came home that evening. "Surprise!" Thea said. Mr. and Mrs. Doohickey certainly were surprised. This was not what they had in mind, but then Grandma told them what else she had made. On Halloween, Thea had the most fun she had ever had marching in the costume parade. First prize went to Mary Lou Von Helper for her Bo Peep costume. Thea did not win a prize, but Mr. and Mrs. Doohickey did. The judges thought the butterfly costume Grandma made for Mrs. Doohickey was dreamy, and Mr. Doohickey's Spanish dancer costume with its red ruffled shirt and black pants really wowed them. Thea was so proud. Maybe next year her mother and father would come in first. And that's the end of another Halloween story. Join us again next time. I hope to see you soon.